Two starving little girls, no older than 8, moved like shadows through the cold. One leaned heavily on a broken stick, each step a struggle, while the other gripped her sister's trembling hand as though it was the only thing keeping them alive. Their faces were pale, lips cracked, eyes hollow with hunger. People passed them by, heads turned, feet hurrying, as if the children were invisible. No one stopped. No one cared. Until he did. A young off-duty cop, with only his loyal German shepherd beside him, stepped forward, and unknowingly into a story that would not only shatter the silence of one town, but reveal a truth far darker than hunger itself. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments. And if you believe no child should ever be left to suffer in silence, hit that subscribe button now. Because what you are about to hear is not just a story, it's something that will stay with you forever. The town of Maplewood carried the quiet charm of a postcard. It was tucked between rolling hills, with silver streams that wound lazily through the neighborhoods like ribbons of light. In autumn, the air had a crisp bite, and today the ground was covered in a patchwork carpet of amber, ochre, and deep red leaves. The pale sky stretched wide overhead, clouds drifting slowly, dragging long shadows across streets and fields. At the heart of town lay Maplewood Central Park, a place usually filled with children, joggers, and families. But on this day it was strangely still. The fountain in the center had already been drained in preparation for frost. The swings at the playground swayed gently, squeaking on rusty chains. Near the middle of the park rose a massive oak tree, so broad and ancient that its branches formed a canopy like a cathedral roof, sheltering the ground below with dappled light. It was here, under the great oak, that Ethan Walker had spread a plaid blanket. He was 28, young by some measures, but he carried himself with the steady bearing of a man shaped by uniform and duty. Even without his badge or vest, the discipline of years on patrol showed in the squared set of his shoulders, in the way his eyes scanned without ever truly resting. His dark hair was neatly trimmed, though the damp autumn air had begun to curl the edges. His jaw, rugged and strong, softened only by a quiet expression that seemed older than his years, as if he carried too many stories behind those calm gray eyes. This afternoon, however, Ethan had dressed plainly. Dark jeans, a navy, sweater, boots scuffed from long miles. To anyone else, he looked like an ordinary man, enjoying a rare hour of peace. But the quiet watchfulness in him never left. Beside him sprawled Rocco, his German shepherd partner and closest companion. Rocco was a magnificent animal. Sable fur, shining with health. Every muscle beneath that coat trained and disciplined. His amber eyes swept the park constantly, alert, sharp, yet softening whenever Ethan's hand rested briefly on his back. At 5 years old, Rocco was still in his prime, half warrior, half guardian, a dog that could bring down a suspect in a heartbeat, yet melt into gentleness when a child reached out to him. Ethan unpacked a simple meal. 2 sandwiches wrapped, in paper, an apple, and a thermos of steaming coffee. For Rocco, he had packed a chew bone, tucked carefully into the bag. The officer settled back against the oak, stretching his long legs, letting the soft hush of falling leaves and distant caws of crows fill the silence. For once, the world seemed still. But peace never lasted long. Rocco's ears twitched first, his body stiffening before a low growl rumbled deep in his chest. Then came the sharp bark, loud and insistent, echoing through the stillness of the park. Ethan sat up at once, every sense alert. His eyes followed the line of Rocco's stare, and that was when he saw them. At the far edge of the clearing, creeping forward as though afraid the world itself might strike them, were 2 little girls. They were twins, though not identical. Both were heartbreakingly thin, their fair skin streaked with dirt, their blonde hair tied back in messy tangles that hadn't felt a brush in days. The elder, Laya, held her sister's hand fiercely, eyes wide and defensive, her chin lifted, in stubborn defiance that looked far too old for her young face. Her body shook with cold and fear, but she stood like a small soldier, ready to fight the world if she had to. Her sister, Ren, leaned heavily on a rough stick, using it as a crutch. Her right leg was swollen beneath the torn leggings, her limp, sharp and painful. Each step looked like agony, yet she clung to her sister, breath quick and shallow. Her gray eyes were vast pools of fear, and when Rocco barked again, she flinched so hard she nearly fell. Only Leia's grip pulled her upright. Both girls looked half-starved. Their ribs showed beneath the thin fabric of their shirts. Their lips were cracked from thirst. Their stomachs clenched visibly as though the very act of standing consumed the last of their strength. At last, Ren stumbled, her knees buckling as she sank to the ground under the oak's shadow. Laya knelt beside her, whispering desperate words too soft for Ethan to catch, her eyes darting constantly toward him and his dog. Ethan rose slowly. His training screamed caution, but his heart surged with something stronger, compassion. He lifted his palms, showing them he meant no harm, and spoke in the steady, calm tone he had used so many times with frightened children on calls. "It's okay," he said softly. "He won't hurt you. Neither will I." Rocco, still bristling, stopped barking at Ethan's quiet command. He sat obediently, ears sharp but posture lowered, amber eyes flickering with something gentler now. Laya's gaze darted toward the bai, food spread on the blanket. Hunger warred with fear. Ethan saw the tremble in her hands, the hollowness in her cheeks, the defiance barely masking desperation. Quietly, he reached for one sandwich, unwrapped it, and set it down before him. "You look hungry," he said gently. "Come closer if you want. No pressure. It's here if you need it." The girls didn't move at first, but then Ren whimpered softly, clutching her stomach, and Laya's pride broke beneath her sister's pain. Step by small step, she guided Ren forward. When they reached the edge of the blanket, Ren's legs gave way again. She fell, gasping, until Laya helped her sit upright. Ethan crouched, offering the sandwich. Ren's tiny hand shook as she reached out. The moment she bit down, tears streamed down her dirt-stained cheeks. She chewed slowly, almost reverently, as though afraid the food would vanish. Laya hesitated longer, eyes filled with shame at needing it so badly, but finally she accepted the other half. Ethan handed them a bottle of water, and they drank in desperate gulps. Watching them, Ethan felt something twist in his chest. He had seen neglected children before, but this was different. The fear in their eyes, the guarded mistrust, told a deeper story, one that spoke of cruelty hidden in shadows. He didn't ask questions yet. Trust could not be forced. For now, what mattered was that they were no longer starving. Across town, inside the brick walls of the Maplewood Police Department, Lieutenant Maria Alvarez studied a stack of troubling reports. At 42, Maria was a veteran of 2 decades. In law enforcement, respected for her discipline and feared for her sharp intolerance of excuses. That morning, she had uncovered case files suggesting guardians collecting stipends, while children in their care were left malnourished, absent from school, or worse. "Rumors," her detective muttered. But Maria snapped the folder shut, her eyes blazing. "Rumors are smoke before fire," she said. "Keep digging. These kids deserve more than paperwork." She didn't know it yet, but her investigation was already on a collision course with Ethan's quiet encounter beneath the oak tree. Back at the park, the sunlight dipped low, painting the grass with molten gold. Ren leaned weakly against Laya's shoulder, her sandwich half-eaten in her lap, her eyes fluttering shut from exhaustion. Laya kept glancing at Ethan, weighing whether this man and his watchful dog could be trusted. Ethan said nothing more. He simply offered them another bottle of water and let Rocco curl beside him, the steady rhythm of the dog's breathing an anchor in their drifting world. For the first time in many days, the twins were not utterly alone. But as Ethan studied their weary faces, he knew this was only the beginning. Somewhere behind their silence lay a truth that would demand to be uncovered. The sky over Maplewood dimmed into a watercolor wash of grays and oranges as the day waned. Leaves spiraled lazily through the park, settling into quiet drifts against the benches. Ethan Walker gathered the remnants of his picnic, his thoughts heavy as he watched the two little girls huddled together under the oak tree. They had eaten hungrily, but their guarded stares told him food alone wasn't the burden they carried. "Come on," he said gently, folding the blanket. "It's getting cold. You can stay at my place tonight just until we figure things out." Laya hesitated, her eyes flicking from Ethan to Rocco, then back again. The older sister's instinct to protect was written in every line of her small frame. Wren leaned on her stick, exhaustion etched across her pale face, and gave her sister a pleading look. After a long pause, Laya gave Asmal reluctant nod. Ethan offered his hand, but Laya chose instead to cling to Wren as they followed. Rocco trotted ahead, occasionally looking back to ensure they kept pace. Ethan's apartment was a modest space above a coffee shop near Maplewood's main street. The stairwell creaked as they climbed, the scent of roasted beans lingering faintly in the hall. Inside the apartment was tidy, clean but unpretentious, with worn furniture that hinted at long days of work and short nights of rest. A bookshelf lined with old law manuals and crime novels leaned slightly under its weight. On one wall, a framed photograph of a man in uniform. Ethan's late father stood beside a faded sheriff's badge. "Make yourselves comfortable," Ethan said, gesturing to the couch. He fetched 2 blankets from a closet and handed them over. The girls clutched them tightly as if afraid someone might snatch them away. Rocco padded to the corner, laying down with his head resting on his paws, eyes still watchful. For several minutes, silence filled the room, broken only by the hum of the heater. Ethan didn't rush them. He'd learned that silence could be safer than questions when it came to frightened children. Eventually, Wren's eyelids fluttered, and she slumped against the armrest, asleep almost instantly. Laya sat stiffly beside her, her fingers twisting the edge of the blanket. Ethan pulled up a chair and sat opposite her, his tone careful. "You don't have to tell me everything tonight, but I need to understand just enough to keep you safe. Can you trust me with that?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. For a moment, Ethan thought she might stay silent, but then in a halting voice, words spilled out. "Our mom? She died 2 years ago," Leia whispered. "It's just been us since then. We had to live with Harold." Ethan listened without interruption. "He drinks a lot and he gambles. Always loses." Her small voice trembled but gained strength. As she went on, "He keeps us locked in the bedroom sometimes. Says we don't deserve food unless he gets money from the state. He says we're theresa and he gets paid. So we better be quiet." She glanced at her sister, her jaw tightening. "He hits us if we make noise. Wren got hurt in the storm because she tried to sneak into the kitchen for bread." He pushed her. The admission hung heavy in the room is sharper than any confession Ethan had taken in his years on the force. He clenched his jaw, forcing his voice to remain steady. "I'm sorry, Laya. You didn't deserve any of that. None of it." Her eyes brimmed but did not spill. She had learned too young how to swallow her tears. Ethan leaned forward, his gaze steady. "You're safe here tonight. Harold isn't going to touch either of you again. That's my promise." Laya gave the smallest nod, her face pale but resolute. She shifted closer to Wren, who murmured in her sleep. Ethan stood and moved to the kitchen, pulling out his phone. His thumb hovered over the contacts. He knew he would have to report this, but for now the girls needed rest. He typed a short message to his superior instead. "Possible abuse case. 2 minors safe for the night. We'll update in morning." Across town in the fluorescent-lit office of the Maplewood Police Department, Lieutenant Maria Alvarez reviewed a thick stack of welfare reports. The day's work had stretched long into evening. Maria rubbed her temple, her dark eyes narrowing at the inconsistencies in front of her. Several names repeated across her desk, guardians receiving stipends for minors who were rarely seen at school or community events. One name appeared again and again: Harold Briggs. She flipped through his file. Harold was in his late 40s, listed as the stepfather of 2 girls. The reports described him as unemployed, dependent on benefits, yet neighbors had logged complaints about loud shouting, frequent drunkenness, and gambling debts. Maria Spen tapped against the table as she read. She called in Detective James Harlow, a man in his early 50s with a weathered face and a habit of chewing gum incessantly. James had been with the department nearly as long as Maria. His sharp instincts made him invaluable, though his cynicism sometimes grated. "What do you make of this?" Maria asked, sliding the file across. James scanned it quickly, his brow furrowing. "Looks like he's gaming the system. Takes the money, leaves the kids to rot." Maria folded her arms. The neighbors mentioned screaming at night, muffled like children crying. If half of this is true, those girls aren't just neglected. They're in danger. James leaned back. "Problem is no hard evidence. Welfare fraud is one thing. Abuse? Without testimony or visible proof, it's his word against rumors." Maria's jaw tightened. She had seen too many cases stall for lack of evidence. Children slipping back into danger. "Keep eyes on Briggs. If there are children in that house, we'll get them out one way or another." Sumay. Back at his apartment, Ethan tucked a blanket more securely around Wren. He watched as her breathing steadied, her small chest rising and falling with the rhythm of sleep. Beside her, Laya still fought to stay awake, her body taut with the need to remain vigilant. "You don't have to keep watch anymore," Ethan said softly. "I'll take care of it tonight. Rest and—" But her eyes stayed open, locked on him, measuring every word. Ethan didn't mind. Trust had to be earned, not asked for. He settled into the chair, Rocco lying across his feet, a silent sentinel. For the first time in a long while, Laya's eyelids drooped. The couch creaked faintly as her small body gave in to exhaustion. The room grew quiet, save for the soft hum of the heater and Rocco's steady breathing. Ethan leaned back, staring at the ceiling. He knew tomorrow he would have to bring Maria into this, to put Harold's name on record. Tonight, though, his only duty was to keep the girl safe. And for the first time in weeks, maybe months, 2 frightened sisters slept without fear. Ofa locked door. The morning light in Maplewood crept through Ethan Walker's apartment blinds and thin gray stripes. The town stirred slowly below. Coffee shops opening their doors. Buses sighing at their first stops. But inside, Ethan's mind was already racing. Wren had barely stirred all night, her sleep restless and punctuated by soft whimpers. Ethan couldn't ignore the way she winced each time her leg shifted. By 8 a.m., he bundled both girls into his truck. Laya held Wren's hand, speaking softly to her in the back seat. Rocco sat upright in the passenger seat, alert and protective, his ears flicking with every sound. Ethan drove them to Maplewood Medical Clinic, a squat red-brick building at the edge of town that smelled faintly of antiseptic and rain-soaked leaves. Inside, they were greeted by Dr. Helen Crawford, the town's pediatrician. In her early 50s, Dr. Crawford was a kind-faced woman with streaks of silver in her brown hair and reading glasses perched permanently on her nose. She had the demeanor of someone who had seen more than her share of bruises on children, yet never lost her gentle patience. She crouched slightly to meet Wren's eyes, her voice calm and warm. "Hello, sweetheart. I hear you've had a fall. Let's take a look, shall we?" Wren clung tighter to her stick, glancing nervously at Ethan. He gave her a small nod. With Laya's encouragement, Wren allowed herself to be guided onto the examination table. Rocco settled firmly at her side, chin on the edge of the table, watching every move. Dr. Crawford examined the swollen knee, her hands careful but precise. "There's some infection setting in," she said at last, her tone even. "It isn't severe yet, but we'll need antibiotics and rest. No running for a while." She looked at Ethan with quiet seriousness. Had this been ignored, it could have turned dangerous. Ethan felt the weight of her words. He bought the prescription immediately after, his jaw tight as he imagined what might have happened if the girls had remained under Harold's roof. Back at the apartment, Wren rested on the couch with her leg propped on pillows. Rocco refused to leave her side, occasionally licking her hand when she stirred. Laya, however, remained tense. Though her sister now had medicine, her own burden pressed heavier than ever. That evening, as the heater hummed and the street outside grew quiet, Ethan noticed Laya sitting rigidly near the window. The glow from the street lamp caught the tears clinging to her lashes. "What's on your mind?" Ethan asked gently. Isla's lips quivered before the words broke through. "Harold, he always said, if it weren't for us, he'd have nothing." "You brats are the reason I get money," he used to yell. "And if we made him mad, he'd say he should have left us outside one winter and let the cold do the work." Her small hands clenched in her lap, her nails digging into the fabric of the blanket. The bitterness of Harold's voice echoed through her memory so sharply she nearly flinched at the sound of her own words. Ethan crouched beside her, his eyes steady. "What he told you was a lie, Leia. You and Wren are worth more than he could ever understand. You're not a burden. You're children who deserve love, and he failed you." For the first time, Laya let her tears spill freely. Ethan put a reassuring hand on her shoulder, not forcing her to meet his eyes, but letting her know she wasn't alone. In the corner, Rocco raised his head, ears flicking, before letting out a low, soothing whine, as if echoing Ethan's promise. While Ethan's apartment settled into fragile safety, the Maplewood Police Department worked under harsher light. Lieutenant Maria Alvarez sat at her desk. Stacks of documents spread in meticulous order. The overhead fluorescent buzzed faintly as Cher viewed Harold Briggs's financial records. The first red flag was the pattern. Harold submitted paperwork every month claiming food expenses, school receipts, and health checkups for 2 dependents. On paper, it looked immaculate, a guardian providing diligently for children. But Maria had learned to distrust neat paperwork. She cross-referenced the claims with other sources. Surveillance footage from a grocery store showed Harold purchasing nothing but alcohol and lottery tickets during the same weeks. He claimed hundreds in food expenses. Hospital records revealed no visits for the children at all in the past year. Maria called in Officer Dylan Kerr, a young patrolman with sharp eyes and a restless energy that sometimes made him appear overeager. At 25, Dylan was still proving himself. His sandy hair often unkempt from long shifts, but his attention to detail made him valuable. "Check the camera across from Briggs's house," Maria instructed. "The neighbors keep complaining about disturbances. I want to know who's coming and going." Later that day, Dylan returned with still images printed from the footage. Harold's figure appeared several times, stumbling into the house at late hours, carrying bottles. Never once were the girls seen leaving for school or play. "This lines up," Maria muttered grimly. "Paperwork says he's buying school supplies, paying for field trips. Reality says the children are ghosts behind locked doors." James Harlow leaned against the doorframe, arms folded, his gums snapping once. But without testimony or direct witness, it's smoke, not fire. Courts don't take kindly to smoke. Maria's expression hardened. "Then we'll find fire. No child in this town should vanish into silence while someone profits off them." Back at the apartment, night deepened. Wren shifted restlessly in, her sleep, the pain in her knee dulled by the antibiotics. Laya lay awake beside her, her small fingers stangled in the fabric of the couch, as though anchoring herself to something real. Ethan, sitting across the room, felt the weight of the day pressing in. Harold's shadow loomed over every word Leia had spoken, and Ethan knew this was not a man who deserved guardianship of anyone, let alone two vulnerable children. Rocco stirred at his feet, resting his head on Ethan's boot, as though reminding him he wasn't alone in carrying the burden. Ethan reached down, scratching behind the dog's ears, his mind already racing with what tomorrow would demand. Reporting Harold was no longer just procedure. It was a moral necessity. As the clock ticked past midnight, Ethan whispered into the dim room, not expecting the girls to hear. "You're safe now. I swear it." The day broke with a thin veil of mist hanging over Maplewood, softening the outlines of rooftops and making the town look older, more tired. Ethan Walker drove slowly down a side street, his truck's tires crunching over damp gravel. In the back seat, Leia and Wren sat close together, their fingers entwined tightly, as though one could vanish if the other let go. Rocco rode in the passenger seat, his alert eyes fixed forward, ears twitching at every sound. They were headed back to the one place the sisters least wanted to return, Harold Briggs's house. Ethan had argued against exposing the children to more trauma, but the case needed proof, and sometimes Thesmalist hands pointed to the largest truths. He had promised them he wouldn't let Harold be there, and he meant it. Today's search was under the official supervision of the Maplewood Police Department. 2 patrol cars already sat outside when Ethan pulled up to the peeling 2-story house. The siding was stained with years of neglect, and the shutters hung crooked on rusting hinges. A sour stench of stale beer and mildew clung to the air, even from the curb. Ethan's gut twisted as he glanced at the children in the rearview mirror. "You stay close to me." "All right. Rocco and I will be right here." Leia nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. Wren clutched her wooden stick and leaned against her sister, her small shoulders tense. On the porch, Sergeant Paul Hensley waited, clipboard in hand. Paul was in his mid-40s, thick-set with a weather-beaten face and a bristling mustache that seemed perpetually stern. Yet beneath his gruff appearance, he carried a steady calm that had guided many volatile searches. He tipped his cap at Ethan. "Walker," Paul greeted. His voice was growly but even. "We'll supervise the sweep. Keep it professional. Keep it clean. No kids wandering off." His gaze flicked to Leia and Wren, softening for just a heartbeat before, returning to formality. Inside, the air was worse, stale, suffocating. The living room floor was littered with empty beer bottles, overturned ashtrays, and crumpled bedding slips. The television, still on, though muted, displayed a loop of late night reruns, the screen's blue glow casting a ghostly pour on the room. Ethan guided the girls carefully, his protective hand resting lightly on Wren's shoulder. "Do you recognize where he keeps things?" he asked gently. Isla's eyes darted around. She pointed toward a tall wooden cabinet pressed against the far wall. Its doors hung slightly ajar, though the top drawer was locked. "He always kept his papers there," she whispered. Rocco padded forward, nose twitching as he sniffed along the cabinet's base. His tail stiffened, and he gave a sharp bark, scratching lightly at the bottom drawer. Ethan crouched beside him, tugging on the handle. It was jammed shut. With Paul's approval, Ethan pried it open, using a small crowbar. Inside lay a mess of receipts, false school reports, and envelopes thick with forged documentation. Ethan flipped through them, his eyes narrowing at signatures that were clearly forged. Tucked deeper in the pile, a fake medical statement claimed. Both girls had undergone routine checkups just last month. Records Dr. Crawford would easily disprove. "Got it," Ethan muttered. He handed the folder to Paul, who began cataloging items for evidence. Meanwhile, Rocco nosed at the floor near the couch, whining. Ethan pulled it aside to reveal a loose board beneath the rug. Leia's voice quavered. "That's where he hid money." With the sergeant's nod, Ethan pried the board free. A tin box emerged, stuffed with cash, most of it in wrinkled bills and betting slips linking Harold to illegal gambling rings in neighboring counties. Laya clung to Wren as if ashamed of what had been uncovered, but Ethan gave her a steady look. "This isn't your fault. You've been braver than most adults." The girl said nothing, but Wren's small hand reached out and touched Rocco's fur as if drawing strength from the dog's steady presence. Across town, Lieutenant Maria Alvarez sifted through another layer of the case. In her office, a corkboard now displayed photographs, receipts, and notes that painted a wider, darker picture. Harold Briggs wasn't just a neglectful guardian. He was entangled in a network of underground betting parlors that stretched beyond Maplewood. Maria flipped open a file labeled Cedar Street Syndicate. This was no small group of local gamblers. It was a web of enforcers and bookkeepers who demanded their debts be paid in full. Harold's name appeared repeatedly, flagged by confidential informants as the man who keeps 2 kids locked up just for the checks. Her detective, James Harlow, leaned over her desk, arms crossed, so that's why he held on to the girls, not for love, not even for appearances. They were his ticket to survival with the syndicate breathing down his neck. Maria nodded grimly. He kept them like collateral. The welfare money was his lifeline to cover debts. James spat his gum into the trash. "It's filth like this that keeps me up at night, using children as shields against loan sharks." Maria's voice was hard as a siren. "Then we'll cut the cord. We're not just rescuing 2 girls. James, we're unraveling a financial racket." Back at Harold's house, evidence bags filled quickly. Paul Hensley gave Ethan a short nod. "This is solid enough. Toppish charges of welfare fraud. Maybe more. Judge won't be able to ignore it." Ethan glanced at the girls. Laya's face was pale, her lips trembling as she pressed against her sister. "You've done enough today," Ethan said softly. "Let's get you out of here." As they stepped into the daylight, the house loomed behind them like a rotting carcass. Leia exhaled shakily as though she had been holding her breath inside the entire time. Wren leaned against her stick. Rocco pressed protectively at her side. For the first time, Ethan felt certainty settle in his chest. The girls weren't going back to Harold. Not now, not ever. The evening in Maplewood settled in cold and sharp. A thin rain falling in streaks that blurred the edges of the street lamps. Ethan Walker stood with Rocco near the patrol cars parked discreetly a block away from Harold Briggs's house. Laya and Wren were already safely taken to the station where a kind-hearted death sergeant had found them blankets and warm cocoa. Ethan had watched them go, their eyes wide with fear, but finally touched by the faintest spark of safety. Now his focus was here on the darkened house where Harold was expected to return. The silence broke with the uneven roar of an old pickup truck pulling into the driveway. The driver's door slammed. Harold Briggs stumbled out, his bulky frame lurching forward. In his late 40s, Harold wore the years of drinking and gambling like scars etched on his skin. His hair was greasy, thinning at the crown, and his unshaven face was flushed with liquor. He staggered up the porch steps, muttering curses under his breath before kicking the door open with a violent crash. Ethan exchanged a nod with Sergeant Paul Hensley, who had organized the operation. "Let him step inside," Paul said quietly, his mustache twitching with tension. "But keep your dog ready. We don't know what he'll do." Inside, Harold's rage erupted. Furniture scraped and splintered under his kicks. The muffled sound of glass bottles shattering echoed through the thin walls. His voice carried outside, harsh and broken. "They took my money. Those little rats stole my life from me." Ethan and Rocco entered first, the air inside thick with stale alcohol and fury. Harold spun toward them, his bloodshot eyes narrowing. "You," he slurred, pointing a trembling finger at Ethan. "You took them. You think you can ruin me?" He swung a chair across the floor, sending it crashing into the wall. Ethan's stance was calm, but firm. "Harold, it's over. We've got everything. Need. The papers, the cash, the lies. The girls aren't yours to hurt anymore." Harold's face twisted, his voice climbing into a furious roar. "They were my ticket. Without them, I've got nothing." He lunged forward, his fist balled, his heavy frame barreling toward Ethan. Rocco shot forward, a deep growl vibrating through the room. His powerful body planted itself between Ethan and Harold, teeth bared, ears pinned back. Harold froze mid-step, his drunken bravado faltering at the sight of the German shepherd's gleaming eyes and low guttural snarl. He staggered back, slamming, into the table behind him. "Call him off!" Harold shouted, though his voice cracked with fear. Ethan's tone was cool, steady. "Stand down, Harold. The dog won't touch you unless you make him. Put your hands behind your head." For a tense moment, the room held its breath. Rain hammered against the windows. Rocco's growl deepened, vibrating like a warning drum beat. Harold's gaze flicked from Ethan's unwavering stance to the dog's unyielding posture. With a frustrated bellow, he swung one last punch into the air, then stumbled backward. Officers poured in through the door, pinning his arms and forcing him to the ground. Cuffs clicked into place. Harold fought weakly, cursing, until exhaustion and drink left him sagging against the floor. Paul gave Ethan a short nod. "Good work. Clean and safe." Ethan looked down at Harold, his voice quiet but edged with steel. "You won't touch them again. Not ever." Outside, the rain eased. At the station, Laya and Wren clung to Rocco the moment Ethan brought him to them. The big dog leaned into their embrace, his tail sweeping once across the floor. For the first time, the girls smiled. Shy, fragile smiles, but smiles nonetheless. Ethan saw in their eyes a glimmer of something that had been absent for too long. Hope. At the station's interrogation room, Harold sat slumped, his wrist chained to the metal table. Across from him, Lieutenant Maria Alvarez opened a folder thick with evidence. Her sharp eyes studied him with controlled disdain. "You've been caught lying on welfare records," she began evenly. "Fraud, neglect, abuse. That's enough for years in prison, but we know it doesn't stop there." Harold smirked weakly, though his eyes flickered with unease. "You think you know me?" Maria leaned forward. "We know about your debts. The Cedar Street Syndicate. They wanted their cut, and you kept 2 children locked up so the checks wouldn't stop. You were a pawn, Harold, nothing more." The color drained from his face. He tried to sneer, but his words tumbled out in slurred desperation. "You don't know the half of it. They said if I lost the girls, I'd lose my neck, too." "I had no choice. Everyone has a choice," Maria replied coldly. "And you chose greed." Harold's testimony poured out in broken fragments. He admitted to running errands for the syndicate, signing papers they provided, and keeping the girls hidden as leverage for steady cash flow. His words opened the floodgates to a wider investigation. James Harlow, observing from behind the one-way glass, muttered, "He's just cracked the door open on a whole nest of roaches." Maria's pen scratched across her notepad. "Then we're not stopping at Harold. We're burning the nest. Over the next days, leads unraveled rapidly. Several other guardians on welfare lists were discovered to be frauds. Names connected directly to the syndicate's network. Homes were searched, children rescued, and fraudulent records seized. What began as a single case of abuse in Maplewood now stretched into a statewide campaign against financial predators. Back in the quiet of the station's lounge, Ethan watched. Laya and Wren sitting side by side, cups of cocoa in their small hands. Rocco curled protectively at their feet. He saw how they leaned into one another, shoulders pressed as if to remind themselves they were not alone anymore. The storm of the night had passed, and with Harold in custody, the first light of dawn broke across Maplewood. For 2 little girls, it was the first morning in a long time when fear was not their first thought upon waking. The courthouse of Maplewood stood like a monument of stone and steel in the center of town, its tall columns rising against the pale winter sky. On the morning of Harold Briggs's trial, the square outside was crowded with townsfolk, reporters, and officers whose faces carried both relief and fatigue. The case had become more than just a local scandal. It had pulled into light the hidden cruelty of guardians, misusing children for financial gain. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was hushed yet electric. The benches were filled. Neighbors who had long whispered about Harold's late-night tirades, victims' advocates, and even parents clutching their children a little tighter. At the front, Judge Clara Whitmore, a stern woman in her early 60s with sharp cheekbones and steel, gray hair pinned into a bun, presided with an air of unwavering authority. She was known for her piercing gaze that seemed to cut straight through lies and for her deep belief in protecting the vulnerable. Harold sat at the defendant's table, shoulders hunched, eyes bloodshot, the swagger drained from him. The orange of his prison uniform dulled his once belligerent presence. When the charges were read aloud, fraud, child abuse, financial exploitation, he shifted in his seat, jaw tightening, but no bravado remained. Ethan was present, seated behind the prosecutor's table with Rocco lying quietly at his feet. Beside him, Laya and Ren sat with a child advocate, dressed in clean clothes donated by the community. Laya's small hand rested protectively over her sister's, her gaze steady despite the nervous tremor in her body. Ren leaned against her, still clutching the wooden stick, though her limp had eased after weeks of care. The prosecutor, Daniel Reeves, rose to speak. In his early 40s, Daniel was a tall man with close-cropped dark hair and a sharp voice honed from years of exposing corruption. He laid out the evidence, falsified welfare forms, hidden cash, and testimony from the children themselves. Harold Briggs not only abused 2 innocent girls, Daniel declared, his voice echoing through the chamber. He exploited them as tools for profit. While debts to organized gambling rings consumed his conscience, his actions are not just immoral, they are criminal in the gravest sense. When it was Harold's turn, his defense attorney muttered weak pleas of hardship and addiction. But Judge Whitmore's expression did not waver. She raised her gavel and spoke with crisp finality. Harold Briggs, this court finds you guilty. You are hereby sentenced to 8 years in state prison for fraud, child abuse, and financial exploitation. Justice demands that the children you harmed will never again live under your shadow. Gasps and murmurs filled the room. Harold slumped back, defeated, his fate sealed. As Harold was led away, the focus shifted to the wider network his testimony had exposed. Over the following weeks, the Cedar Street Syndicate unraveled under relentless investigation. Dozens of arrests were made across the county, bookkeepers, recruiters, and fraudulent guardians who had hidden behind paperwork while children suffered. In Maplewood and beyond, guardians who had used children as pawns were sentenced, their prison terms ranging from 5 to 12 years. Lieutenant Maria Alvarez addressed the press outside the courthouse steps, her voice clear over the clicking of cameras. She stood in her uniform, shoulders squared, her dark hair pulled back tightly. Justice today is not only about punishing Harold Briggs, she declared. This trial marks the beginning of a wider reckoning. Dozens of children across this state will no longer be treated as bargaining chips. Let this be a reminder. The law exists not only to punish the guilty, but to return childhood to those who had it stolen. The crowd erupted in applause. Maria's words carried weight, not because they were loud, but because they were true. For Laya and Ren, the legal proceedings marked both an ending and a fragile beginning. Officially, the court declared them wards of the state. But Ethan Walker had already submitted his petition for guardianship. His testimony, combined with his spotless service record, persuaded Judge Whitmore to grant him temporary custody. The paperwork was dry, full of clauses and stamps. But when Ethan emerged from the courthouse holding the documents, the meaning was alive and warm. Laya and Wren stood waiting outside, the cold wind tugging at their coats. Rocco bounded forward to greet them, his tail sweeping like a banner of joy. Ethan knelt to meet their eyes. "Looks like we're official," he said softly. Laya blinked, her lip trembling as though unsure how to smile. Then slowly, a light flickered in her expression. Wren, braver this time, reached out and wrapped her arms around Ethan's neck. For the first time, she whispered, "Thank you." That evening, in Ethan's modest apartment above the coffee shop, a new kind of silence filled the rooms. Not the silence of fear, but of peace. The table was set simply. Bowls of stew, fresh bread, glasses of milk. Rocco lay stretched near the couch, his head lifted as though counting himself among the family gathered there. Laya ate cautiously at first, as if testing whether this meal might be taken away. Wren leaned her crutch against the table and dug in more eagerly, laughter spilling softly. When Rocco nudged her elbow for scraps, Ethan sat across from them, his heart swelling at the sight. It wasn't grand. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. Later, as the girls curled on the couch under a blanket, Rocco nestled between them, Ethan watched from his chair. The storm of months. Past had passed. In its wake, something new had taken root. Fragile, but real. A family stitched together not by blood, but by choice, compassion, and courage. In the end, this story reminds us that even in the darkest places, a light can be kindled through compassion and courage. Some would call it chance. Others would call it fate. But many of us know it as a quiet miracle. The kind only God can place in our path when we least expect it. Two children once abandoned and forgotten found safety, love, and a home not through wealth or power but through kindness and faith. It is a reminder for our own lives. Miracles are not always grand or loud. Sometimes they appear in small acts. A shared meal, a protective hand, a faithful dog standing guard that ripple outward to heal what was once broken. In every ordinary day, there is a chance to be someone's answered prayer. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it with others. Leave a comment with your thoughts and subscribe so you don't miss the stories to come. May God bless you wherever you are, and may He keep your heart open to the quiet miracles still waiting to be seen.